Welcome to the 6th presentation on the management project, which is concerned with the product. The order of contents is over 2 slides, so you'll start with any confidentiality statement, a statement of authenticity, and don't forget the word count. Next is abstract and keywords. Abstract is normally single-spaced and is no more than 1 page, followed by a title page, preface, dedication and/or acknowledgements, and table of contents. Next, list of tables, list of figures, list of any other. Then the body of the text, which is immediately followed by the references, and Appendix A, Appendix B, and so on and so forth. And don't forget that Appendix A needs to be your original project proposal. Talking about appendices, do be wary of not to put too many appendices in your management project. Appendices are only consulted when the person who is marking this project, which will be your academic mentor, and a second marker who will be unknown to the academic mentor at the start of the process, if their curiosity is aroused from within the text. So do not rely on appendices. Various strategies exist. For example, putting extra literature review in the appendices, it won't be looked at. Appendices are there to support, but not to replace the word count. This is the classical structure of a dissertation, and indicative, with the emphasis on indicative, word counts. So introduction, 10%, literature review, around about 20%, methodology, 20% again, results, 20%, discussion, 20%, and conclusions and recommendations. So when you are writing up your management project, have this in mind. It may be that you move and emphasise according to which you think is going to be more important. For example, you might pinch 5% out of the methodology, and in order for you to shore up your literature review, because that's where you feel that the word count is, and the emphasis is going to be needed. This is a suggested structure. So your first chapter is your chapter of chapters. That is to say, a general introduction, and it also informs the reader what they're going to read. So a way of thinking about this is your chapter of chapters tells the reader what you're going to tell them, then you tell them in the body of the report, and at the end you tell them what you told them. No doubt you've heard this before. Another way of thinking about it is what's called a Minto structure. In the Minto structure, the structure is situation, complication, question and answer. But you don't use those titles, you actually bury it in the structure of your report. So chapter 2 is around the sponsoring organisation, the organisation that you have done your research around. And it's really great there to put a photograph of a building or buildings. If relevant, to have photographs of the products. It really brings it to life for the people that are going to assess the management project on your behalf. So I really would have a think about that. Your other chapters then can be various literature themes. So for example, you may have a literature theme that you call organisational learning. Another literature theme may, for example, be around marketing. A separate methodology chapter, a number of different chapters in between depending on how things pan out. You have a results chapter, an analysis, conclusions. Your project proposal is again in Appendix A, and as an example of how you might use the appendices is to have an example interview. We don't need to see all the data. We do trust you that you've done your data analysis, but it's really helpful to see a live example of the analysis that you've conducted out, just to give us a warm and fuzzy feeling that you've conducted the analysis, but also it's interesting from our perspective as well to dive down in some of the things that you've done. So your literature review, you need to have what are known as your ceremonial and legitimising citations. These are, for example, if you're using organisational learning, you'd need to have references from Senge and Argyris, for example. Who are the gurus in that particular area that you would reasonably expect to see, and without whom you would be suspect as to whether you've had an idea of who those people are. You'll need approximately 100 references. If there's 101 or 99, that's not too much of an issue. If there are 4, or in some instances none, then that would be highly suspicious. If you put no references in, then it will probably fail. On the other hand, you probably won't have room to put any more than, say, 150. Beware nibs and nits. Nibs means not in bibliography, and nits means not in the text. But of course, you'll be using a piece of software like EndNote or the equivalent where that isn't going to be an issue. Basically, you use the references, so anything that's in your text matches anything that's in your references in the end. You shouldn't put extra or pad it out in your references with references that you haven't actually used in the main text. Just to emphasise that the literature is around analyse, synthesise and evaluate. If you think about the contested areas in your management project where people disagree, great. So why do they disagree, and what is your view of the various different perspectives? If you think as authors as being different voices, you can compare the two, analyse, synthesise it together, and then in order to be able to customise it to your own situation. So the emphasis is on being critical, not descriptive. So descriptive is so-and-so says this, so-and-so says that. Whereas to be critical is to, as it says in point 5, analyse, synthesise and evaluate. Here is an indicative layout in terms of the format. Now, you don't have to use this particular format, and it's one of these damned if you do and damned if you don't. If we don't put something in, then people will say, what format do you need? And if we do put it in, people say, well, I want to use Arial 10. That's fine. No great issues. This is the indicative layout. You can change it. I'm sure most people will not be exercised, provided you don't use something like Comic Sans Serif. Here is an example of a table of contents laid out with all the chapters. Now, there are templates available for you on Canvas. You can lift those templates and customize them to your own particular management project. So that's what they're there for. It's not plagiarism, it's not anything like that. It's just to make your life a lot easier. We've set it up for you so you can do that. So this is what an example of table of contents look like. And rather than do this manually, you're much better off doing it using the embedded functionality in Word or equivalent word processing format. This is what the table of figures looks like, and again these can be auto-generated. You will note that it is chapter followed by the figure within that chapter is the best format, which makes it unique rather than having a contiguous list of figures. And the same applies to the table of tables, where it's chapter followed by the number within that chapter, and also of course the page number. Do make sure that if you're using something like the Word format, that you update right at the end and there isn't the embarrassing no hyperlink found. And this is how to format your figures within the management project. They need to be centralised, they need to be an appropriate size. So things that are not too big, they take up an entire A4 page, unless that's what's actually required. They need to be centred, they're better in colour, it really brings it out if they're in colour. I know this is fairly obvious, but there are quite a number of management projects that get handed in that are just black and white, and in this day of colourful types of text, then it does look a bit dated. The title is below it, so you'll see that uses the standard of, that is chapter 5, and it's a first figure within chapter 5. It has a title. That title can then get auto picked up by the software, which gets updated. And if you have derived that particular model, that particular figure, then do put source author. If it is somebody else, then you do need to reference it. Now, I always think this is a great opportunity if you do adapted from. If you do adapted from, it means that you are thinking about, you're not just going to the literature and just simply adopting whatever's there, but rather you adapt it to your circumstances. If you do that, it shows insight, it shows creativity. And this is what the tables look like. This is chapter number, again, followed by the table within that chapter, followed by the title. And then that title will again be picked up and it will update your table of tables. Tables should be centralized. And this is what your references need to look like. To an academic, this is a thing of beauty because they're all formatted correctly. You'll notice that the word processor has picked up in red where it doesn't recognise that particular word, so you can have a double check of that. But it's very, very clear where this is coming from, and it also uses the Bradford version of Harvard, which you need to enter into EndNote, which is the disadvantage of using a piece of software that isn't EndNote. It won't have the Bradford format for you. If you use EndNote, it's all automated for you. Some reminders: the word count is 15,000. There are penalties for going over the word count, which is 1% off for every 1% over. So if you would have achieved 63 and you go 1% over, you get a mark of 62. The limit for the word count excludes the title page, the abstracts, the keywords, the preface, table of contents, references, diagrams and tables, footnotes, and appendices of data. Basically, it's from where you start with introduction to the last word in your conclusions. You submit your management project through Canvas. So it's only electronic version that we need. We don't need anything on a USB drive. We don't need anything printed out in this day and age. So for your file name, use your UOB number followed by your first and last name. And you need to submit using either Word or a PDF format. When you do submit, check the familiarity index, similarity index within Turnitin. This will give you an indication of whether you have used any cut and paste from, and it will allow you to readdress that. You can resubmit that as a different version. Do remember that as far as plagiarism concerns, plagiarism is more than 2 paragraphs. Anything that's above that, in fact it should be 0 paragraphs. When you get your Turnitin report with your similarity index, the highest amount should be 1% or less. You will get some duplications because the format is the same as other students and it will pick that up, which is fair enough. But do make sure that you have nothing that is cut and paste unless you're actually directly quoting it. Double check and triple check that. Finally, for project confidentiality, finally on this slide I hasten to add, there is a pro forma that's provided in the study book and it will not be submitted to the library. So as we get to the end of this, then some suggestions. Pick a challenge that is relevant to your future career, something that you can go into a job interview for promotion, for example, and say you already have experience in this particular area. What happens to your work after you finish your project? Is it something that will continue afterwards? Try not to be too overly ambitious. A management project is a management project. It's not about changing the world. It's about changing the area that you have decided upon. Assign word counts to sections so you know whether you're getting too verbose in particular sections or it's too short. Leave time at the end. It's amazing when we all finish the product that we don't necessarily realise that somebody needs to proofread it and they need time to be able to do that. And don't forget, your proofreader will pick things up which you also have to amend, and then the proofread process takes another iteration. So user word processors, as I've already said, the template's available there for you to use in Word for page numbers, cross-referencing, page numbers, table of contents, table of tables, table of figures, and so on. So it's very handy for you to cross-reference back. It's a large document. Your reader will get lost. At the time they will be saying to themselves, why am I reading this? What relevance is that? So remind the reader what the relevance is going to be, but don't make it too repetitive, which is a balance. Finally on this slide, back up, and back up. My suggestion would be that you use a service that is in the cloud so that you don't have the embarrassment of, or the risk that you could lose some or all of your work. Unfortunately, if you do lose some or all of your work, it's not something that can be submitted as mitigating circumstances. The marking process then is the first marker will be your academic mentor. The second marker will be somebody who is in the same area as your first marker. They'll be in the same research centre. A sample is sent to the external examiner. The marks then go to an assessment committee. From there they go to the Board of Examiners, and at that point the results are confirmed. If your project is confidential, only those who are involved in the assessment will actually see your management project. There is nobody else involved, but we can't guarantee how many people will see it, but we will keep it to a minimum. If there is any discrepancy between the first marker and the second marker, then it will go to adjudication or a third marker to be able to finalise it with a mark. Usually though, it's agreed between the first and second marker. Finally, thank you for watching MBA Project Product.